Okay, uh, let's discuss how the mechanics of real estate development work. The whole point of this quite uh, short video session is to explain the opportunity for fundraising for real estate development projects. Okay, so as you may know, in Australia, real estate is a big deal. Real estate development is very lucrative, but uh, actually a lot of risk is borne by the real estate developer. They have to find good opportunities. They have to take on the debt. They have to do pre-sales, etc. So it makes a lot of money, but it also has a lot of risk which comes with it. Uh, the best position actually is to be in the position of the lender, and not just any lender, but the second mortgage lender. Uh, I'll try and explain how the mechanics of real estate development actually work. So let's say you are trying to do a land subdivision, a very simple land subdivision. Okay. Yes, this one. We're trying to do a simple land subdivision, and okay. You have a plot of land, and there's an existing house over there. So what you want to do is you want to demolish it and you want to subdivide, and you want to put two houses on top of it. And then you want to sell them. So let's say each of these houses, nice fancy houses, sell for 1.5 million each. Okay. So 1.5 million plus 1.5 million is 3 million. This is typically called as the GRV, which stands for gross realized value. Now, in order for a project to be profitable, most good developers will at least want a 20% margin on their cost. So which means that if your 3 million is your GRV, then you need at least a 20% margin. Okay. So your cost can't be more than 2.4 million. Okay. Now let's say the cost of construction of these fancy townhouses is around 500K each. We're talking about 500K construction. Okay. So if 500K is construction for the build, then that leaves 500K plus 500K is 1 million. Now 2.4 million minus 1 million, it leaves 1.4 million. Now, not all of this can be spent on land. You need money for the following things. You need money for town planning. You need consultants. You need sales and marketing for your pre-sales, commissions, etc. And there are a lot of other expenses also happen. So give or take financing, you have to pay for financing fees, etc. as well, interest, council fees, etc., etc. So which means that in reality, if around 400K is spent on all of the above items, you cannot pay more than 1 million for the land if you're going to put up two townhouses on it for 1.5 million each. Now, oftentimes what happens is property developers, they tend to overestimate this figure and they tend to underestimate this figure. Okay. And that gets them in trouble because they borrow too much. But let's say everything adds up and you have made sure that your cost is around 2.4 million. You have a nice 20% margin in there. Now let's see how a deal is actually financed. So I'll select all of this. So where does the 2.4 million come from? Okay. Now, okay. So the 2.4 million comes from 2.4 million is your cost to complete, CTC. 3 million is your GRV. Okay. Now, 1 million is your land. 1 million is built, and 400K is a lot of other things, like the things which we discussed. Now, this is your cost to complete, okay? So typically, if you have identified a $1 million piece of land, then the process kind of looks like this. You first put 10 to 20% deposit, which developer has to pay out of his pocket. 1 million, let's say 200K, okay? Now, bank will potentially lend you 800K for this, and you settle on the land. Now, at this point, you can go and try and get plans and permits done. And while you're waiting for it, you also try to get some marketing done so that you can get some conditional pre-sales in place. Now, what has happened these days is if once your plans and permits are approved, then you have what is called as a project. At this point, it was just land. Once your plans and permits are approved, you know exactly what can be built. At this point, you have what can be described as a project. So at this point, a bank will say, okay, you need another 1.4 million to complete the project, okay? So what a construction lender will do, or what a bank will do, is they will now lend against the project, and the project is based upon, the project's value is based upon either this, it's based upon this, okay? So bank or a typical lender would lend you around 80% of cost to complete or 65% of GRP. Okay, they usually end up being the same figure. So if you take 2.4 into 8, that comes to around 2.4 into 8 is it's a bit late and my mind is not working. Into 8 is roughly 19 million, like 1.9 million, sorry. So now you know that you can get 1.9 million in borrowings from a typical bank. But that out of that 1.9 million, 800K goes to paying off the initial first mortgage, which was there. And now you're left with 1.1 million, in which you have to complete your build. And you also have to pay for this thing, okay? Now, as you can see, this number is more than this number. So 1 million plus 400K is 1.4 million, and you have 1.1 million over here. So which means that you have a 300K shortfall, which is what you have to pay out of your pocket, and you also paid out of your pocket over here. So roughly, this is your investment in the project, 500K. And remember, the difference was 600K, which means that everything being equal on a 500K investment, in a year or two, you will make a 600K profit, which is 100% plus return. Now that's quite awesome, yeah. And quite often than not, it does actually work. Property developers do actually end up making a lot of money. But if you are unable to sell this for 3 million, or your cost blows up over here, or you don't get the plans and permits in time, then things start getting into dangerous territory. So especially if your build goes above, you don't get your plans and permits in time, then what happens is this figure, which is your borrowing, stays the same, and you cannot change that. So let's talk about, and usually what ends up happening is most people actually end up screwing themselves over here. They end up paying far more than 1 million. They think, oh, this is an awesome project, and they end up paying actually far more than what should be paid for the project. So let's talk about it from the lender's perspective. Just pause this a bit. Yeah. Now, it looks as if this is very profitable for the property developer. He has making almost 100% return, but in reality, it doesn't really happen that often. What ends up happening is some of these costs end up blown up, and more often than not, what happens is in order to lend, a bank will either lend 80% of GRV or 2.4 million of cost to complete, and then they will ask them to get a valuation report which meets this number, and oftentimes the valuation comes up lower, 2.8 million. Now, what ends up happening is if your valuation is lower, you can only lend 80% of this, which means that instead of getting 1.9 million, we get 1.7 million roughly, which means that instead of 500K, you have to put another 200K, which is 700K. Now, at this point, the returns are still okay. I mean, you're still making almost 100%. Now you're in the 90% territory, which is still good for 1 or 2 years worth of work. It's still a good return. But you still need to pull up another 200K. Plus, a bank will say, I want to see pre-sales. I want to see pre-sales worth, if I'm going to lend 1.7 million, I want to see pre-sales of at least one or both of the townhouses. Now, oftentimes what property developers realize is they are better off completing it and going for auction, or the amount of time you would spend to get the pre-sales is not worth it. You can complete the project and you can go to the next project. The faster you roll your money, the better off you are. So instead of banks, there is a new industry which is called private lenders. And these private lenders will take on, will give you this money, okay? And they will also give you this additional 200K as well, okay? Which means what they will do is they'll give you this debt which is required, and that is called as a first mortgage. What a first mortgage means is out of this 3 million, their 1.7 million plus interest gets paid out first. So even if your 3 million or 2.8 million turns to almost 2 million instead of 2.8 million, they will still get paid. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll clear this off and we'll start again. So what does payout stack look like? So the payout stack is first mortgage, and let's say that was 1.7 million. And then for the 200K, you have what is called as a second mortgage. And then you have equity. Equity is what the developer gets paid, which is in this case 500K. So 500 plus 200, 700, 700 plus 1.7 is 2.4 million. Project completes. Now out of the 2.8 million or 3 million, this guy gets paid first, which is why it's called first mortgage. This guy gets paid second. This guy gets paid third. So typically the payout order is like this, okay? The risk is also like this. And if everything works, then the reward is also higher. I mean, this guy gets the greatest rate of return. This guy gets the second greatest rate of return. This guy gets the third greatest rate of return. That's just half the story. When you go to a private lender, and this is now a massive industry, for this 1.7 million, you need to pay fees. So what you are looking at is typically around 8% interest rate, 8 to 10% interest rate, then you have 2% in fees, then you have application fees 10K plus drawdown fees, line fees, etc., fees, which come to around another 1.5%. Okay, so effectively for a first mortgage position, you are paying anywhere between 10 plus 2 plus 1.5. So you're paying on an average around 12 to 14% from the developer's perspective. The second mortgage, even though the amount is lower, you still end up paying a lot of fees. Your fees are typically around 3 to 5% in this territory. So you'll pay around 6 to 10K, etc. And the rate of return for this is anywhere between 15 to 25%. Okay, so the rate of return is also quite high. And then whatever is remaining is good, is left for you. Now, the reality is instead of making that 600K on your 700K investment, what ends up happening is you make around 400K on in 900K investment after everything adds up. So you still make an 40% return on average, okay, which is still good, checks out. Still good business to be in, but you wear a lot of risk. Whereas these guys, they are making a 12 to 14% return. And these guys are even better. But there is somebody over here who is actually making a much better return. And it's the guy who is the broker over here. So on this 1.7 million placement, and this is probably one of the smallest loan they'll make, 1.7 million into 2% is 35,000. Okay. And then they make around 10K over here. And they will also make some fees. They'll also make fees in various different steps along the way. Now, what Estate Baron had tried to do is we tried to raise money for equity, and that's a terrible position to be in because all of these guys rank ahead of you. The opportunity is actually over here. The safest position is actually over here, first mortgage, but the issue is the amount you need to raise for this is quite high often. Now, this is the smallest example. This figure is usually 10x or at least 5x. So you're typically raising at least 5 million, 10 million, etc. And that means that these fees are also much higher. And the reality is most institutional funds, etc., they are happy to make this kind of return for a very low level of risk. So there are big family offices, private funds, etc., which will loan you the money for the first mortgage, and there are brokers who will make this 2%, and typically they will make 100 to 200K per transaction. Now, these institutional funds, however, don't want to touch the second mortgage fund. So if you can create a second mortgage fund, which typically has a deployment ticket size of 200K to 2 million or maximum 3 million, then you can easily tie up with the family offices and say that, okay, we will lend the second mortgage behind your first mortgage. And then you can give an offering to the developer saying that, okay, I will give you all the money you need. Okay, come to us, we'll give you the first, we'll give you the second. And if required, we can also do preferred. So even this equity is often split, but we'll not go into that over here. But if we can give both the first and second, and you don't need to raise the money for the first, you can always place it from a number of funds out there. You only need to raise the money for the second and give the developer the certainty that I will have the second, because that's what they really need. First mortgages are relatively easy to find. However, if you can offer both the first and second together, then that's a very compelling opportunity. So on this deal alone, which is like a very small deal, you're making at least 50K, 60K, 70K actually, give or take, for just placing the deal. Now, what you can do is you can have a prospectus in which you are raising 2 or 3 million in a second mortgage position, and you can place the first mortgage, you make a fees from that. In the prospectus, the money is being lent to the developer. This is a property developer. This is his hat, hard hat. and you can have like a 2 million to 3 million. This can be even a pool fund. Okay. And if we can underwrite this, then there is a massive business over there. We can even list it. And we have tried this before as well. We always struggled with underwriting. And the challenge always has been underwriting. If you can underwrite this much amount of money, then this is a massive, massive, massive business. Eventually, there's always an opportunity to do your own property development, etc. But even if you don't want to do that, you don't want to take on the risk which this guy has to wear, then just placing first mortgages and second mortgages is a massive amount of money to be made over there. Plus, we have all the connections, we have all the property developers, we have the right skill sets to analyze a property deal. We have due diligence people, we have connections with first mortgage lenders. We can source any number of second mortgage deals. So maybe Malaysia can consider that. Maybe we can put together a fund for that. We can list it on the SSX and we can partner up in this. We can tokenize it, etc. as well. And in fact, that is the entire reason for Concrete's existence. We are trying to do this. We are trying to be in a position where we can underwrite this. Everything else is a means to an end. If we can solve the funding gap for property developers, second mortgage is the problem. First mortgage is not the problem. This unlocks huge amounts of money. All right. Cheers.